We became the transporter and pilots for the U.S. mob, and we brought in $3.8 billion worth of cocaine into the U.S. directly obtained from Pablo Escobar. He was right there at the plane. We could hear him talking.
This is Inside the Life with Giovanni and Dutch, produced by the Mob Museum. Giovanni, Rocco, and Dutch McAlpin are former police and federal task force operatives. They infiltrated drug cartels, outlaw motorcycle groups, and the mafia. Now, they share their stories, along with others who have gone inside the life.
Pete?
Yeah.
Frenchy?
Yeah.
Pierre?
I'm blown away, right? I mean, this is one that I was looking forward to because just all this happened when I was a kid, right? I was a baby. I don't remember. He started his career before me, but this is what I grew up on. I mean, this is the stuff that, you know, you watch the movies as a kid and to sit here and talk to Pete and meet him in person and hear his story about the French Connection.
Yeah.
And about how the DEA came to be, the organizations that we work for and work with through our whole career.
He talks about doing $85,000+ heroin deals. Like, we bought some heroin. You know, he's done so much, so many huge, vast things.
This is a guy that blazed the trail for you and I, right? But it's more important to share the story of the French Connection and give an insight into things that happened long before our careers and our time. And the stories of him getting a call from the president and taking a call with the president,
like no big
President
deal.
Reagan.
And the president called.
Yep. Hang on tight. Enjoy the next hour. And here's Pete Charette.
Pete, we're going to try to touch a little bit on your early life, where you grew up and where you came from.
You share in your book, Pete, of your childhood and what led you to want to be in law enforcement. But long before your law enforcement career, you served in the military. Your family, I think you wrote about your family coming here to the States at a young age because of your father's health. You needed to be in warmer climate, or he needed to be in warmer climates. And that led you to live here in the States with your family. And then your commitment to our service. You served in the armed forces and the military. And that kind of drove your direction, pivoted towards law enforcement, right?
What made me go into this type of career was as a young kid, I lived in Valleyfield in the Quebec province. And my two brothers and myself were walking towards my dad's restaurant from school and in downtown Valleyfield. And we came to a traffic light, and I was 9 years of age at that time. And my oldest brother, Gil, said, "What are you looking at, Pete?" And I said, "That man there," I says, "he's got a uniform and a badge, and he's talking to that lady." He goes, "Yeah, that's a police officer." I had really not ever seen a police officer, you know.
Right.
Is Valley View a small town?
It's, I would say right now the population is about 10,000, yeah.
Huh? And you're in Canada, so are we talking about like mounted patrol with the big hats and the red? And
oh, yeah, yeah.
And all the police officers look like that?
Well, not anymore, but that's how they used to. And I was so impressed, and I said to my brother, I says, you know, someday I'm going to be doing what that man's doing.
Okay. Right.
That's what I want to do. And that stuck with me.
Right.
And so that's where my thoughts about becoming a law enforcement agent.
Okay. And then after your time served in the military, you applied to be in law enforcement. And your first...
when I was in the military, I joined the military police. I went in as military police. I was supposed to go to Vietnam as an interpreter, French interpreter with the Montagnards. But next thing you know, my orders from the MP school when I graduated says Albuquerque, New Mexico, Sandia base. And I told my sergeant, I said, something's wrong here. I've signed up for Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And so I went to personnel, and they said, no, you're DASA. And I said, what? He said,
what's DASA?
Defense Atomic Support Agency.
Mm-hmm. So you're moving into immediately a top secret position with the highest levels of clearance.
Oh, this was where the nuclear bomb was first made,
okay.
And that is where the nuclear storage, one of the nuclear storage depot is.
Right.
And it's all armed forces type base. So I ended up in on Sandia base, and then I was promoted to a Spec 4 after a year and a half, which, from what I was told, that's unbelievable, and that's the equivalent to almost like a sergeant.
Yeah, it's a pay grade. It goes.
Oh yeah,
It's like you start out at step 1, that's step 4, basically.
yeah. So with that, I did investigations on my own because I always read the laws and what the definitions of all the laws and all that, and that was just me. I wanted to find out, what to enforce and not what to enforce. Well, I ended up being approached by the provost marshal, who is like the chief of police, and he and my lieutenant and sergeant asked me to be the candidate to become military police officer of the year for the Army Command.
Right.
And I was honored and ended up getting the military police officer of the year.
Right. Now, because you got the military police officer in your book, you also write about how that sprung you into law enforcement.
Yeah.
How that brought you to, I believe it was Fort Lauderdale and in Broward County. And I want to highlight everything in your life, but we don't have enough time.
Yeah.
But we have to cover the story of when you become a Broward County sheriff and you're a rookie and your first assignment ever. And this is crazy when you hear the story. So if you could just share a quick story about your first assignment and your first day as a police officer.
My first assignment was to be a deputy sheriff on patrol, uniform officer. This was in 1966. After we were at our briefing, my sergeant said, okay, everybody calls me Frenchy. So he says, Frenchy, he says, you're working zone 1. And he said, there's some rough guys there, but he says, we only got 5 deputies working the entire county.
Right.
That covers from Miami line, which is Dade,
Right.
all the way to West Palm Beach. It's about a 20-mile stretch.
And you're talking about 5 deputies working this
That's
time.
all there was.
Just to kind
High
of
crime.
bring the Broward County Sheriff's Office test for deputy sheriffs every single Wednesday now. I actually tested for a job there. I had to swim through the pool with the clothes on and do an agility test. And I think there's 3,000 deputies there now to cover the same space that you guys were covering with 5 deputies back then.
Yeah, I think total patrol officer with day shift and all that, I think there was like 80 of us. That was it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've been assigned to now.
Now, I was assigned to road patrol to, zone 1. And so my first night on duty, just quickly, I'll say it. What happened is I finally went to the motor pool and to get my car. And there was a gentleman that had just pulled up in an unmarked car, and burly, a husky like you. And he walked over and he goes, hey, kid. He goes, you're the new guy on the block from what I hear. And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I'm Lieutenant Cecil Stewart. I'm a head of Vice Squad. He says, let's go around the corner here. I want to talk to you, so nobody else could hear. And he said, I want you to do something for me tonight. And now this is my first day on the job.
Right.
And he said, I said, okay. And he said, at exactly 7:00 tonight, you're going to call in on the radio, say your car's overheating, and you're going to come in to get a new car. And he says, and then you're going to, while you come in, you walk over to the courthouse, which was right across the street. And he said, go upstairs to the 8th floor where the dispatcher is and the lieutenant. And he said, I want you to go up there, walk in, tell the lieutenant he's under arrest, and handcuff him and take him to the booking desk. Now, I thought, well, this guy's, just
That's got to be
Pulling
a
your
setup.
chain.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a setup,
Yeah.
like a rookie
like
thing to pull.
A rookie setup,
break him
the new
in.
guy on the block. And he
It's
said,
not uncommon for guys to pull a prank or two on a rookie,
not for a
especially
new
his first
guy
day.
and
Yeah.
to arrest your lieutenant.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. And he said, you're not to tell anyone, your sergeant or anyone about this. I'll see you later. And he left. So I got in my car and I went to work. And around 7 o'clock, I kept saying to myself, am I being set up and all that?
Right.
Just like what we all would think. And next thing you know, I called in on the radio, and the sergeant says, I'll cover your zone, Pete. Go ahead and make it fast, blah, blah.
The sergeant because you're requesting to go to motor pool.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
right.
okay.
And so I left, and 7 o'clock, I walk into the courthouse, go upstairs, 8th floor. Never forgot that day. And next thing you know, I walked down the hall, and the dispatcher's office was to my left, and the lieutenant, his office was right across from the dispatch. And she looked at me, and I walk in, and the lieutenant looked at me and goes, what are you doing here? I says, well, I've been ordered to do something. He goes, get back to work. And I says, Lieutenant, I got orders to arrest you and take you down to the booking desk. And he stood up and he goes, you SOB.
Right.
And he put his hand on his gun. And when he did, I drew down on him.
Really?
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I drew
forgot
down
that
on him
part.
and I said, turn around, hands on the wall. I've been ordered to arrest you. This is real, pal. And he is cursing at me. I'll have you fired, you SOB, blah, blah, blah. And I handcuffed him. Now I hear the scream from the dispatcher, and she's on the radio saying to the sergeant, Pete's arresting the lieutenant. He's got his gun out.
The new guy.
gun
The
out.
new guy's
Just
arrested
the
the
new
boss.
guy on the block.
Yeah.
So I took him down to the booking desk, and when I walked in, the sergeant at the booking desk looked and goes, what the hell? And I go, Sarge, I've got orders from Lieutenant Cecil Stewart to arrest the lieutenant. And his face kind of dropped. He goes, you don't have to say anything more, Frenchy. He says, I'll take over, go on back to work.
Right.
And what it was is that later on, Lieutenant, I saw him when I got off the shift. And he thanked me, and he said, this guy was running tags at a cat house for a madam to see if those weren't undercover police cars.
Yeah.
And so he said, you'll be hearing from me.
Right.
And that was my first episode of my one hell of a ride.
Right. Holy cow.
Pete, you're talking about the police lieutenant was sitting in dispatch, and he'd been accused of running tags for a madam. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, license plates of clients.
If you run a license plate or a tag through a data system, you can find out people's names and addresses, where they live. And unfortunately, like, there are dirty police officers that this wouldn't be the first and only case and the last case of that.
Right, right.
But it's the first time I've heard of a rookie having to arrest his lieutenant on
yeah.
duty for it his first
It's a
day.
hell of a way to introduce yourself.
Yeah, to the whole department.
Yeah. So, and then I, probably it was about, the zone that I worked in was, it was rough. And so I did a lot of my own investigation. Mm-hmm. So one night I was just driving by on Hollandale Beach Boulevard, and I was going east, and there was a car dealership halfway down, and I just happened to take a glance, and I saw a guy ducking down behind a car.
Right.
And I just kept on going, and I said, okay, pal, the game is on. And I turned around about a quarter of a mile down the road and shut off my lights, got my binoculars, and I started looking. Sure enough, they were breaking into the car dealership.
Right.
And I radioed my sergeant, and I said, Sarge, I got a car theft gang starting to heist cars there. And he says, I'm on my way, Frenchy. And I said, okay. I said, I'll keep you posted. Stay on the other side, And long story short, and that one is real quick. Is is we finally arrested them. They had pull up 2-car trailers, and they were loading the cars. And the sergeant says, "Okay, let's arrest them." I said, "No, nobody arrest them." I said, "Load up every car they load on that car thing is a charge."
Yes.
And,
Oh, let it pat. Yeah.
So you're thinking ahead, even as a young guy, you're thinking
and the
how the
sergeant
investigation
goes,
would be bigger.
he said, "I like the way you think."
Now,
So-
because of the way you thought, that kind of sprung you into doing undercover work as well in the PDs.
Yeah, well, I was doing patrol one night in Fort Lauderdale. There was a nightclub, bar nightclub in the black community. And I was driving, and it was pouring downpour like you wouldn't believe. And as I drove just to see if there was any problems going on at that club, and I see this guy laying in the gutter, and I mean the water's just rushing, and he's got a bottle of whiskey in his hand, and I stopped, put on my blue light, and I said, "This guy's going to get killed. Run over." You know, he's in the gutter, and he's facing towards the club. So the bouncer at the door says, "This drunk's been there now for about 45 minutes. You know," he says he's totally out of it. I said, "I'll take care of it." So I walk over and I said, "Hey, get up." Nothing. So I kicked him a little bit. Nothing. So I leaned down, and I figured, well, he's probably totally drunk, you know, and asleep, and he's all soaking wet. And I leaned down to pick him up, and he goes, "Get away from me. I'm a cop."
Mm-hmm.
And I go, "You know what, you piece of S?"
Yeah.
I said, "You're not even worth it. It's raining and all that." I said, "Guys, whatever happens, if something happens, you know, call the police and, you know, get an ambulance, but I ain't messing with this guy." And I took off. Well,
Did you recognize him, or he just had that feeling?
I didn't even know.
You just
But
believed him?
I believed him just because he leaned over and he goes and whispered, "Get away from me. I'm a cop."
Mm-hmm.
So I just left. And so when I finished my shift, I go to the motor pool, and there he is waiting to speak to me. And he had been injured in the Korean War, and his right arm was almost blown off, and it just dangled. So he only had one good arm. So he walked over and introduced himself. He says, "I'm a narcotics agent, the boss of the narcotics from the Vice Squad." So he said to me, he goes, "Frenchy, I like the way you reacted." He says, "You were quick, you know, boom." And he said, "You played this perfect for me. I arrested 2 guys dealing heroin after you left." So he says, I want to thank you. And he says, "You'll be hearing from me." I said, "Okay." That was it. Well, about 4 months later, not even a year on the job, I was promoted as a detective
Right.
in the Vice and Narcotics Squad. And that's how it led up to my, and when I saw what he was doing and all that, I said, "This is what I want to do, undercover work."
What was the first role you played undercover?
Me and my partner, we were sitting there at the nightclub and having a drink, and there was 2 guys from us, and one of them started saying, "Hey, you guys live here and all that. We're from California, blah, blah, blah." Long story short, we got to talking, and while we're talking, says, "You know, we're just looking for, you know, for connections. We're always looking for a connection."
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, they said, "Yeah, we're here also to do some selling." So I said, "Well, I'd be interested. That's what I'm looking for. I'm a buyer."
Yeah.
So as a result, as we walked outside, we shook hands, and he said, "You know, we're going to be here tomorrow night. We need to talk." And he shook hands with me, and he had a plastic bag, and I just grabbed it and see you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
With
And-
LSD in it?
Yeah, there was
LSD can go right through your fingertips.
Yeah, but
and-
it was like a little coin bag,
Yeah.
you know, plastic bag. So my partner and I said, "Okay, we're on." And next thing you know, we'd ordered, and these guys, that was the first biggest case I made.
How much LSD did you buy?
We bought 7,000 hits.
Wow, that's pretty big.
That's a lot of LSD. I mean, that's
Oh, yeah.
and
Your first hit?
How much? How much did that cost back then?
Well, in those days, they were like $8 a hit.
And the hit's about the size of a pinhead needle,
yeah,
like
about
just
the-
teeny
your
tiny.
pinky, yeah.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
So you're talking 7,000. Was it like on sheets,
Yeah.
with dabber sheets on or whatever?
So yeah, and so we arranged to meet where they were staying and all that at the hotel on the beach, and myself and my partner, and then we had surveillance, and we told them that once we close the curtain, that means come on up and hit it because we got the stuff. So,
So were these guys actually from California?
yeah, they were from California. Yeah.
This is the 70s then? Like I'm trying to get in my
Yeah,
head, like
it's,
what do these guys look like? What's an LSD dealer look like? Because I know it's not just
Hippie.
Okay,
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Longer hair,
yeah.
like dressed.
Dr.
Transient.
Timothy
Hollywood.
Leary is the one that started the LSD swing in California.
Okay. Did you feel like it was a threatening? As we talked about how every drug deal when you work undercover is
Oh yeah.
terrifying, but in my imagination, buying LSD from hippies doesn't sound too terrifying.
Yeah, but it's the excitement, right? It's your first deal. It's your first major deal. Here you are. It's about not making the deal, but he bought who you were, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and undercover work, selling ourselves. And
Yeah, you
selling
got to
your
sell
persona.
yourself and
That's the
convince them
buy-in.
that you're not the man, the
Yeah.
cop.
You could show up with $1 million in your hand, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, they want your money, but if they don't believe who you are,
But when we went and met them, they said, you got the money? And I said, yeah. And I said, hold on. And I called my buddy and I said, come on up. And so he came up and he showed them the money. And then I said, he'll be back when you show me the stuff and when we're ready. So my partner came back. And so next thing you know, they under the mattress, they had the two attaché case.
Right.
They pulled them out, boom, and showed us and everything like that. So I said, whoa. I said, hey, guys, you never know if somebody's watching, and I close the curtain.
there you go.
So as a result, we waited to make sure they were hitting us. Well, time was going by, and now I see from their body language, they're getting a little fidgety. And I looked at my partner, and our signal was when I winked, that means a draw down on them and put them on the floor. Right. They had a key to the door from the management, but what happened, the elevator wasn't working.
Murphy's Law. That's Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
So
one of the
nobody's
things
coming.
when you always did that, and you always had your takedown signs early in our career, like in doing undercover work. Inside the back of your brain, you go, "Oh my God, I hope they remember the sign. I hope they remember the takedown sign." So here you are closing, and I could kind of put myself in your shoes when you're closing those curtains. You're like, "Oh, I hope they see this," because you don't want to sit there like this. Like, "Hey guys, here I am to come and get it."
So what happened is I winked, and my partner and I both drew down on him.
Right.
On the floor. So they hit the floor down, boom, boom, boom. So finally the team came in and they unlocked the door, and then I'm standing there, and so Nick Navarro, the state agent that used to fund us because we didn't have that kind of budget.
Right.
Great friend of mine. He eventually became the sheriff of Broward County, very famous sheriff. And Nick walked up to me, goes, "Frenchy, you can put your gun away." And he took my finger. I didn't have my gun. I was pointing my. So that became the talk of the
That's just pure
department.
nerves. That's all that was.
But
You didn't even realize it yourself, huh?
I did. I was getting
That's
out
real,
now.
though. That's genuine. That's telling the truth.
And that kind of ended began your career. The undercover work that you did early in your led to you being with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which is now the DEA today, right? Which we know.
Yeah.
But so early on, it was the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and then you joined
Yeah,
that.
FBN in Miami, they only had 7 federal agents in those days. And I used to do undercover work for them because they were well known, 7 guys, the feds. They used to ask me to work undercover for them, and I would do undercover work for the FBN. And had a great relationship with them. And eventually I was also going to college at nighttime and to get my police science degree. And while I was in class, someone from the main office came in and says, "Mr. Charette, you need to go to Miami immediately." So as a result, I blue lighted myself to Miami immediately because it was 9 o'clock at night. I said, "This is going to be some big." So when I got there, the secretary for the director was there, and the director looked like a mafia guy, Italian-looking guy. We called him the Batman.
All right.
And so I walk in, and he goes, "Frenchy, sit down, keep your mouth shut. Get me Washington line right now." And I'm looking like, "Oh, what did I do now?" And as a result, he told them on the phone, he said, "I got him here. Yes, he will take the job, but only as a grade 9. In those days, they started as a grade 5.
Right.
And he's having this conversation. He hasn't even told you what you're doing yet.
No, exactly.
He's agreeing to your salary and that you're taking
He's
his
your
job.
manager. He's your agent.
Yeah, okay.
So as a result, next thing you know, I said, he hung up and said, "Okay, call me back." And I go, "Ben, what's going on?" He goes, "Frenchy, sit tight." Now the phone rings. He picks it up. "Okay, thank you." Boom. And he said, "Frenchy, congratulations. You're going to be sworn in Monday morning. You're going to become a federal agent, and you're going to France undercover to work on the French Connection."
Wow.
Posing as a Canadian mobster.
Now, did he know you had an interest in that already? Like you said,
You had knowledge of the French Connection before that.
But they had President Nixon had came out with the war on drug mandate, and because the French Connection supplied 80% of the heroin to the United States,
okay.
that's why they needed a fluent, not State Department trained French language, but a fluent French. And Miami, when they saw the teletype advertising, they said, "Look no further. Pete Charette is your man."
What's your feelings like when you're being called into doing such a big job? You know what you're being walked into. You have a knowledge of the French Connection. You know the president's mandate against drugs.
Right.
And now you're being called to go on the front line as the number one guy.
I mean, I was in shock. That was my dream.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. But now your dreams come true.
Yeah.
How are you processing this? Like,
I was excited, to say the least, honored.
mm-hmm.
And as a result, 3 months later, I was in Paris, France. And the French government, because of all the corruption they had with their narcotics bureau,
right.
the new director, had asked our guys there in Paris, "Can you find us a fluent French-speaking agent to work undercover here to help us? We cannot work undercover because of the Napoleon Code of Law."
And that's what everybody needs to understand from your standpoint. You understand that the French government can't put undercover operatives. It's their rules of their government. They can't do it.
They called that entrapment.
So you're not only working for the United States government overseas.
I'm working for the French government.
You're now
also
working for the French government.
Yeah.
And now you're overseen by two entities.
Yeah.
Who are going to fight tooth and nail over here.
So I ended up in Paris, and I got there. A week later, I had my first case, and the guys, the director said, "Pierre, we have a source," and he says that these guys have got 15 kilograms of opium, raw opium, to sell. Well, the source, I was told to tell them that I was a French-Canadian mobster and was looking for stuff to bring back to Canada. So what happened is we had the meeting on the Champs-Élysées, and that's the one thing that, I always said, and when I teach, and one of the golden rule is the undercover agent calls the shot.
Right.
The bosses don't call the shot, because I had one of my friends in New York shot to death, bullet right in the head. And his boss told him that he had to meet these mobsters in New York, and he said, "I don't like the sound of it. Right. I'm not doing it." And the boss told him, "You're going to do it. That's an order." And he got killed that night.
Giovanni and I working undercover in our careers, we didn't really have to face that as much. There was never a time that I was going to be held insubordinate if I didn't do something that I felt was dangerous, because these guys, did those things and pushed those limits. and then you working undercover, moving into roles as special agent in charge and everything, passing that down. Then we didn't, and our careers came in working undercover, we don't have to deal with those kind of consequences of like,
Well, and that's because
do
of
it or lose your job. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that is, we had mandates, right? We had a book to follow. We had procedures and guidelines that the DEA eventually, right? By the time we were working at that federal level, but you were there in the beginning. There were no rules really. The government was literally making these rules up as you go because the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was just beginning. And
Yeah,
the DEA.
during that era, the entire group of DEA guys worldwide, we were known as the cowboys. Okay,
Right.
and because we sometimes we worked 3 days without sleep.
Yeah.
In those days, we were go-getters and we were making cases worldwide.
Right.
And it was a team effort. That was the big thing.
Sure.
And so when I made this case, what happened is met the guy on the Champs-Elysees, and we talked, and next thing you know, a car pulls up, and I had my partner come down from the Claridge Hotel with a suitcase and showed him the money, unexpected. They came, showed me the opium. I gave a signal. I took off my hat, scratching my head.
Right.
That was a signal for the cops to move in. And next thing you know, sirens are occurring. And I turned around and I looked at the main guy, and also the source was there. And I said, "You SOBs, you're dead. You set me up." And I took off running.
Oh God.
Right? And so they came in and arrested. Well, I always had my escape route
Right.
planned out. I ran through the lobby of the Claridge Hotel to the back street. And as I was going out the door, I hear a scream saying, "Police," in French. "Police, police, arrêtez, arrêtez, stop. So I said, "What the heck is this guy doing?" And I took off running on the right, very narrow street. And he now comes out of the hotel. I'm about maybe 25 yards further than him. And he's yelling, "Police, police, arrêtez, arrêtez." And next thing you know, pow!
He let a round off.
He shot at me.
Yeah.
Thank God he hit the building.
Right.
Bad shooter. And as a result, I went into high gear.
Right.
I think I broke the world's record running. And I evaded him, and I went into a bistro, and I told the bartender, I called him the patron. I said, "Patron, I need to go in the cave." And he opened up the cave door because they have underground barrels and all that wines. And he shut the door, right? And I could hear alarms, beep, 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 cars and all that. So after 2 hours, everything was quiet and all that. And I knocked on the door and came out, and he goes, "Frenchy, I don't believe you." And I said, "Thank you, and I owe you, and I'll be back." So I went back to the office, and there was the French police director and head of narcotics, the assistant ambassador, my boss, the director, and my assistant boss. And I walked in, and Mr. Lemuel, who was the French director, I said, "Mr. Lemuel, I only got one thing to say. This will not happen again."
Right.
And I go, "What in the hell was this guy doing shooting at me?" He says, "Pierre, we can't tell the uniform cops that you're an American cop."
Really?
And I said, "Well, I think we're going to change that policy because
Yeah, that's pretty unsafe.
You know, if he would have been a good shooter, I would have been dead." So that was my first episode.
Oh, man. That's wild.
Yeah.
Wild.
Did you tell your wife? Did your wife live in France with you at the time?
Never brought it home and never told her anything.
You kept that from her all the time.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
Stuff it down and move
working
on.
and doing the things you do now. How does that treat you? How does that? I found like for me going through those traumatic events, it was good to get with my buddies or somebody and talk about it. And I think it's natural to want to take it home. You've steadfast the whole time. You didn't take that home with you.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? How do you internalize that? Because you didn't get shot at.
my wife knew that the job was dangerous, and knew that I was undercover. And even when I went behind the Iron Curtain in Belgrade and uncovered the first heroin lab in a block country and got delivery of 20 kilograms of heroin, and then smuggled out and arrest warrants all over the world for me through Interpol. What the guys, my bosses used to do, they'd see Chris maybe at the embassy at lunchtime and all that, and say, "Hey, Pete's doing great. Don't worry, he's okay, and he's in touch with us." And told us to say that everything's fine, and that's it.
Yeah, but you have all of this, like you touch on a good point, Dutch, is that when you do these operations, it's international cases, and when you work these international cases that we've done, you can't really talk to somebody about that, right? Because it's compartmentalized.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we worked cases for the bureau that they were locked out of the database. Like other agents throughout the country couldn't have access to cases.
Yeah.
So you really had to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
And not only you sat on this for the longest time, and I remember when you and I were operational, I would have to wait because I didn't want to dump my stress on you, or Pete didn't want to call his buddy.
Yeah.
It would be a while before you saw somebody you can trust enough to talk about that. So you did carry a lot of trauma. Like here you are having somebody shoot at you. That's pretty significant trauma.
Well, I had cases where one Corsican mobster in Little France, I was negotiating for 20 kilos of heroin, and the French police had done counter surveillance prior to my arrival because I had told them, take him from the moment he gets up, see where he goes, who he meets and all that, so we know that there's more players around, because if it's a setup, we'll know what to do. Well, what had happened on that one is that while I was discussing with this guy, he said, have your partner come with me, and we will go and show him the stuff. And then you will come back, and then you can have him get the money. So I said, no, that ain't going to happen. And I always scan my environment. And while I'm talking to him, my back was to the cafe, and I'm looking around the square. I see one of my French police colleague hiding behind the building, and he's going, cut off.
And this is someone you knew and recognized and trusted?
And he was giving me the signal, end it.
Yeah.
So I told this guy, I said, look, I don't like the sound of this. Pal, if you want to do business, you come to Paris. I'm going to be here for a few more days. Otherwise, no, this smells. And we got out of there. Well, my partner kept saying, he was my bodyguard. He kept saying, I'll go with him, Frenchy. I'll go with him. I said, nope. I says, you're here to protect me, pal.
Right.
Keep your mouth shut. So we got in the car and we drove back to Paris. Well, we found out later that the French police had followed his assistants, his cohorts, into a cemetery prior to my arrival. And they had dug up 2 graves, and they were going to kill us and just take the money.
There you go. Yep.
So that was
how much money was it?
$750,000.
Oh,
Yeah,
how much heroin are you going to buy for
20
that?
kilos.
Man,
Your life is worth 20 kilos.
And that's 88 to 89% pure.
Right.
$750,000 back in, what would that equate to now? Multi-million?
Yeah, a few million.
Yeah, because you could cut it 10 times, step on it 10 times, and you got now 200 kilos.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting. But the biggest cases that finally, on the French Connection end, and I'll stop, it was the Salvatore Labana case.
Yes.
Salvatore Labana case was the biggest heroin case made in Europe, and against the French Connection mob. And I had a source that informed me, and it's all in my book there. I don't want to go through the whole thing, but that he knew of someone that was going to be transporting the 20 kilos of heroin for the Corsican mob from originated from the lab to Paris, and then was going to go to Canada, and then Canada to New York.
To New York, yeah.
So we did our surveillance and all that, and when we got word that they had taken off and gone to Marseille, they were being followed to Marseille, and they followed them and saw two of the biggest Corsican mobsters, head of the French connections, meet with the two guys from Paris, Salvatore and his brother. And next thing you know, they came back with them and were seen loading up 2 suitcases, and they were supposed to take it to the train station and put it in 2 lockers. And then this transporter was going to be taken to Canada and then delivering it to a mobster in New York. Well, I was with the director, and we're monitoring what's going on the surveillance at the train station. And so next thing you know, I'm in the office next to the director, and I hear Mr. Lemuel saying, cut it off, arrest everybody. And I said, oh, my God, we're supposed, because I was going to go to
You're going
New
to
York.
deliver it all the way to Canada.
I was going to go to New York, to Canada and New York with the transporter,
Right.
and then arrest in New York. So what happened is they arrested everybody, and Lemuel came in, and my boss was there also, and he goes to my boss, and he goes, Nick, would you mind going back to your office? I'd just like to speak to Pierre here for a minute. And I knew something was up. I said, that's it. We got a snitch.
Yeah.
So Nick said, yeah, no problem, Pete. I'll go and brief the director and all that, what's going on.
You said you got a snitch?
A leak, right?
In
Like
a leak,
somebody
within
someone within the government.
somebody
or
in the
you.
French police
Which is the worst, right?
tipped them off.
Yeah.
So what happened is Lemuel says, Pierre, I want you to listen to some, and he plays the cassette. They had wiretaps on their phone, some of these guys' phones and all that. And the voice said, get out of there, they're on to you. Hung up. And when I heard the voice, this was a real Corsican voice, but it was one of the inspectors in narcotics.
You recognized it?
recognized it, yeah.
Absolutely.
Was he prosecuted for it later?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what happened is that Mr. Lemuel was very embarrassed, and I said, Mr. Lemuel, I said, it won't go any further. Don't worry about it. You have my word and all that. You do what you have to do, and no one will know anything about this.
Right.
And that was it. But what ended up, we arrested 9 individuals, the top French Connection people on the French Connection Corsican mob. All 8 people were arrested.
Really?
And that kind of broke their back right there. And prior to us watching this delivery, Mr. Lemuel had asked me, he says, Pete, right now we keep hearing on our wiretaps with these guys the name Herbie, the New York guy that's supposed to receive the shipment. That's all he said. When Lamana's talking to him, he calls him Herbie, Herbie. He says, can you find out from New York if they know anybody by the name of Herbie? I said, sure.
Right.
So I called New York, and I spoke to the guy on the international team, and he just passed away here recently. And I said, look, got a case, I'm working it, I'm supposed to bring a shipment of 20 kilos to New York, and we're waiting for this to happen, and I need, do you guys know someone by the name of Herbie with the mob in New York? Nope, Pete, don't know. Okay. So I told Mr. Lemuel, no. So what happened is when we took it down, we found out that Herbie, they did know him. They were working the case waiting for this shipment.
Oh, really?
And DEA kept it from us, DEA New York.
Right.
They wanted to make a big
Yeah.
hit.
They didn't want to give up their intel.
Yeah.
They didn't want to get it. Well, this was my case, right? Well, Herbie turned out to be Herbie Sperling.
Oh, really? Yep. That's right.
Herbie Sperling, it was the biggest mobster, heroin trafficker for the U.S. mob in New York.
Everybody in New York knew who he was.
Oh, Herbie was famous. And so we ended up having New York prosecuted. Mr. Lemuel agreed to use the 20 kilos, but he was upset that he had been lied to, and it was embarrassing for us. So what happened is that Herbie Sperling was finally arrested and convicted to life imprisonment. And so that was the biggest mobster in the U.S. mob. And this case was that big.
Was Herbie able to slip away for a while, or they catch him right away?
Herbie died in prison.
He died in prison.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it was a little embarrassing, but this case was major because all the names of these 8 traffickers were the top mobsters that we had been after for years.
Moment, right.
And they were the head of the French Connection.
Yeah. Wow. And out of those guys, who were you dealing with direct? Like, were there multiple people, or you're just dealing with one guy that you were buying dope from and trafficking with?
I dealt with the French Connection guys, with the opium, with the heroin, and Corsican mobs. There was another gang in Paris that was associated, and we busted them, and we went down to Marseille, surveilled them coming back. They were driving Porsche. We
were talking about surveillance, and a lot of times people don't understand when we're working undercover that our undercover roles are part of the case, but we spend weeks and months doing surveillance. Like
intelligence,
you can imagine, like 10 to 15 other people that are documenting times and places that people have shown up. Maybe you've got a wiretap, you're listening to a phone, and I just kind of want to touch on, it sounds like a lot of this case had lots of surveillance for how it gets from point A to point B to the train to New York to Canada. And the undercover role supports that, and the surveillance justifies it all.
And as the undercover, as the operative in this thing, you have to manage all that, right? As the intel's coming in, and the intel's coming in fresh.
Yeah.
You think, all right, I'm dealing with Dutch right now and things are going well with him. And then you find out all of a sudden that his boss is Frenchy. Now I have to pivot from him because the intel coming in. So as an undercover, it's difficult as an asset.
Oh, yeah. You know? Oh, yeah. It's exciting. You get a rush.
Stress
say the least. But, you know, I did undercover work not only just in France with the French Connection. That's the greatest success that we ever made together as a team. But also, you know, I worked in Belgium undercover. I worked in Amsterdam undercover. I received a shipment of 12,000 kilograms of hashish at the docks of Amsterdam. And then, of course, behind the Iron Curtain. And then in Germany, I worked morphine case bases. Italy, I worked. So They were calling me like, "Hey, Frenchy, we need you in Frankfurt today." You know,
we talk a lot about the hair. It's all heroin at this point, and at some point you transition
heroin
to cocaine,
and hashish, and morphine.
Okay,
yeah.
And then is it Operation Southern Comfort? Is that where you transition your undercover life kind of into the cocaine world?
Southern Comfort was different. It's after I left, I was promoted agent in charge of the French Riviera. That was my last assignment. And then I was transferred to South Carolina as agent in charge of South Carolina, just a 2-man office. And from there, I made a lot of cases, arrested sheriffs, U.S. attorney. I advised him of his right. He died of a heart attack a month later. I arrested the chairman of the Democratic Party. He was involved in smuggling, and put police chiefs in jail and all that. And I went from a 2-man office to 7-man office. And we were number 1 in the nation, outdoing the big offices.
Wow. Kind of put that into perspective, like an office then versus an office today. I don't know. Most of the offices I worked in my more modern parts of career were 6 Tories, you know, 30, 40 people on each floor. Like you're talking about taking down major high level people from the South and the United States with 7 guys.
Yep.
And tell me there's not a threat to you and all 7 of your people domestically from within.
That's what happened is because of the way I started a liaison with all the departments, and we arrested all the corrupt individuals, etc. A group of senators and an attorney in Columbia, South Carolina took out a contract to have me killed and my wife and my kids killed. And as a result, it was for real. And
Working public corruption in the 70s in the South, arresting elected sheriffs and prosecutors, that sounds more terrifying than trafficking cocaine and heroin in France.
But we upset and turned the state upside down and made thousands. One seizure I made at the Florence airport, we had a tip that an airplane was coming in, DC-3, under the radar through Jacksonville. Came in, and me and a state agent who worked in my office, I had an informal task force with state and county agents, also with two federal agents.
Right.
And so when we heard about this plane coming in the tower, we had given a lecture to the FAA how to look for suspect planes, et cetera, and all that. Well, here it is. They called and they said, hey, we got a DC-3 that just came in under the radar. And he just popped up, coming out from Jacksonville area. So we said, I told them, I said, call the sheriff's office and tell them we're on our way. We want them there. Do not allow that plane to leave, because we found out through our NATIS system, which is our intelligence system.
Right.
We ran the tail number. That plane was on the lookout for smuggling marijuana. So when we got there, and the sheriff was there, and we walked by the plane, I mean, you could smell it. Oh, my God, you could smell
Raw
it.
the raw dope.
30 tons of marijuana.
Yeah, I'll give you a headache.
On the, and that was the biggest.
I smelled kind of good, really, didn't it?
That was the biggest
Smell of victory.
biggest marijuana case ever made in South Carolina. Sure. But no, that's when they took out the contract on me, and we corrected that incident. Two hooded guys paid a visit to the senator who had started this hit on me.
Right.
And he was told that if you want to continue to want to kill Mr. Charette, we will kill your family and we will bury your grandmother all over again. And either you put a stop to it immediately, or else you will disappear from the face of the earth.
Right.
And next thing you know, the solicitor called me up and said, the hit has been taken off Frenchy. And he's the one that had tipped me on the hit.
Right.
And, well, at the same time, I got a phone call from the drug czar for Reagan, and who is a good friend of mine, Dr. Carlton Turner.
Drug czar?
He's the advisor to the president on drug worldwide.
Okay.
But Carlton called my house, and my son said, it's the White House. And I said, oh, that's Carlton Turner calling me up, because we used to chit-chat, And anytime he came to Atlanta, he used to stay at my house. So I got on the phone. I says, what are you up to? And he goes, you're on a conference call. I says, all right, what's the joke this time? Because he always played jokes on me. And he goes, I'm here with the president. You're on a conference call. I says, Carlton, go to hell.
Yeah,
Excuse my French.
Yeah.
So I hear this voice, hello, Mr. Charette, how are you? I went, oh, Mr. President, I am so sorry. And he's laughing, right?
Yeah.
So basically is what president wanted me to go to Atlanta. And that's where I did the Southern Comfort case.
Oh, okay.
Because
the president was who?
Reagan.
President Ronald Reagan.
And so he asked me, because there was some agents that were too much partying with alcohol and all that at the office, and asked me, can you go? Carlton says, you're the man that can straighten out, because he had a personal complaint come directly to him.
To the president's office?
Yeah, right. About our office there. So I was transferred immediately to Atlanta. All the cases we were involved in shootouts, killing a couple of people tried to kill one of my undercover agents, and I was there, and we ended up in a shootout and all that and killing somebody. But during that's when Southern Comfort came in.
Okay.
They had formed a new presidential task force, and as a result, I was asked to become the person for DEA at the presidential task force. I was the DEA guy, and along with FBI, et cetera, customs and all that. And just prior to my going over there, one of my female agents came to me and she said, Pete, U.S. Marshal introduced me to a guy that had been put on witness protection program. And he used to be the transporter and pick up shipments arriving from Colombia for the U.S. mob and delivering it. And he was doing it with this guy by the name of Harold Rosenthal. And so she tells me about this, and he's been approached to do another load, go to Tennessee and pick up a load. And as a result, I says, okay, let's do it, and we started doing our homework. Of course, Rosenthal was wanted by us because he had escaped from federal prison and fled to Medellin, and the Colombians wouldn't give him to us.
You're saying the American mob's drugs were coming into Georgia? And Tennessee?
Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, California, South Carolina, and Miami, and the Bahamas. Yeah, all come in. And Rosenthal became the broker for the U.S. mob in Medellin with Pablo Escobar. He reported to work every day at 8 o'clock in the morning, meeting Pablo, and then he would organize loads for the mob, and they'd come in and then be picked up. So we made the first pickup with this source in Tennessee. At first, we thought it was going to be Quaaludes.
Okay.
Next thing you know, and I had told my guys, I said, and the state guys and all that, I says, and the source say, in the mobile trailer that you have, that they gave you, once you load it up, make sure that the gas tank is on quarter, because you're going to be traveling, he was told, all the way down to Miami. The next stop from that hotel where you're going is there's a gas station. Tell them that you got to get gas. Well, there was 2 cars, 2 Cadillacs, one in the front, one in the back, 2 guys in each, 2 Cubans, machine guns. They
don't even try to hide it.
No, they didn't.
Like, don't look suspicious or anything.
And
Just 2 black Cadillacs.
Back then they controlled
their orders
everything.
were, if you're stopped by the police, kill them. So next thing you know, he takes off, and he gets this, and he gets off, and they go in, and we waited, and sure enough, he's gassing up, and then these 4 Cubans go in to get snacks and stuff like that, and that's when we gave the signal, move in now.
Yep. Get
Get
them
them away from the car.
Where were you guys at? Just like at a truck stop or something on the side of the
like
interstate?
a truck stop, off the interstate. So they moved in, arrested everybody. Well, 1,250 kilograms of cocaine.
Wow.
Biggest single cocaine seizure in the United States. So we arrested everybody along with the source, and we continued the investigation. That became, the story is in the book. It was named the biggest cocaine conspiracy in the history of the United States in drug enforcement by the Attorney General of the United States, who made the press release 2 years later. We became the transporter and pilots for the U.S. mob, and we brought in $3.8 billion worth of cocaine into the U.S. directly obtained from Pablo.
Right.
He was right there at the plane. We could hear him talking because we had rigged.
Oh, yeah, put a listening
inside.
device in there.
Yeah. So when we arrested after almost 2 years, we arrested 55 defendants, mobsters, et cetera, all over the United States, California, you name it. Right. And that Southern Comfort now is being considered to be a movie.
Both of your stories.
Beg pardon?
French Connection and
French Connection,
and Southern Comfort being marketed to a platform possibly to be
but
made into a
it was
series.
2 years of our life. And as a result, Ross Perot called the president and said, I want to meet Mr. Charette and his agent that were working undercover, et cetera. and I want to honor him in Texas. And we went there, and Ross Perot presented us with the Colt Combat 45,
Oh, wow.
all engraved in gold with his name and all that, and entertained us and had a big sit-down dinner. And it was quite an honor. Quite
beautiful.
an
Yeah,
honor.
that's
Beautiful.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's nice that they did it, but there's just not, to me, it's just not enough thanks for everything you've done. I mean, think of your career, for everything you've done for our country and other countries, and
Well-
the intelligence that you've gathered. Now, Pete, I have to ask you, through all these things that you've done and sacrificed personally, right? You've done. You say that, and I know what it's like to put my family in danger, right? And we all do, right, to an extent. But I've had politicians and mafia collaborate against my health, as you did, right, to put a hit on you. And how did your family deal with that? How did you? Because there comes a moment when you have to involve your family and tell your wife.
Well, when the contract was put out to have me killed in South Carolina, I didn't tell my wife anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And because, then panic would have set in, and I would have had to move my wife and all that. And I knew what we had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the source that gave us the information was the solicitor for the county, and it was a good friend of mine. And he was a nervous wreck. Had called me at his house at 3:00. They're going to kill you, Pete. They're going to kill you. And so what I did for the first few nights is I would get up around 3 a.m, get my Walter PPK. Right now everybody has Beretta. I carried my PPK for 33 years.
So I used to carry Undercover. That's small little gun. It's a
That's
tiny little
Undercover gun.
You know?
Well, yeah, I would not be suspicious at all. That's for sure. A Walther PPK, for like description of
Pocket
them,
gun.
is it's not a very expensive gun. It's definitely a street gun.
But what I did is, I think it was on the second night, I said, I went and I looked outside, and all the lights were off, and I looked up the street, and I saw someone smoking a cigarette. I could see the glow of the cigarette, and the window was down and smoke was coming out of it. I said, okay, you want to play the game? I'll play the game. So I went through my backyard, went on the opposite street, came back, crawled on the lawn of about 6 houses. And
This is in your neighborhood?
yeah, right on my street there.
Yeah.
And I came in from behind him, and then I crawled under the road and crawled to the window, and I said, "You're dead." I hear this guy yelling, "Pete, it's me, it's Dennis, it's Dennis."
The security.
He was one of
One of your
my
security guys? He didn't
one
do a
of my-
very good job.
And I said, "Dennis, I could have killed you." He says, "Pete, they want to kill you, they're going to have to come through me." And he had his AR-15 from the military. He used to,
Oh, yeah.
he used to be on the SEAL team, right?
Yeah.
And Vietnam. And Dennis was a wacko. And he said, "Nobody's going to hurt you." He says, "You're my friend." And I said, "Dennis, okay." So that's how the senator ended up getting a night call.
Oh, he's the guy?
And we gave him the message, and the contract was killed.
Wow. That's amazing.
But no, it was an exciting career, and and then I got transferred, of course, to Washington, and then to Miami. I was they were having liaison problems there, and the director called me in, and he said, "Pete, you're going to Miami." I said, "No, I'm not." I says, "My wife and I like Washington. Don't do this to me." I was an internal affair investigator, and he said, "No." He says, "They need you there because the sheriff's, the liaison's bad." And they said, "Why isn't Pete Charette here? He used to work with us years ago, and, we'd love to see him back." So I got transferred to Miami in 8 years, and then we made more cases. And we were not allowed to have any contacts with the Cuban government. Now, I had an operation that was called Operation OPBAT. And it was an air interdiction program with radars, etc., when they did cocaine drop in the Caribbean.
Right.
And then they would transport it with Go Fast boat. Well, that program great success. It's still a success. And what happened is my country attaché in Nassau kept saying to me, he says, Frog, he called me Frog. Frog, he said, I'm sick and tired. We go in with the Blackhawks because we had military Blackhawk. He says, these SOBs are close to the DMZ zone for Cuba. Mm-hmm. The only person that's allowed communication is the Coast Guard with Cuba. We're not allowed to talk to them. Mm-hmm. And he says, we lost a load last week, and now he says, we got a load. It's going to be happening within the hour, and then we're going to try to catch them before they head to the DMZ. And he said, boss, he says, this has got to stop.
Yeah.
I said, John, you speak fluent Spanish? Tell you what, pal, the hell with the State Department. I'm the boss of DEA here. Mm-hmm. If they go in, go in. Right. The hell with the Coast Guard. This is going to stop because we knew that the shipments would eventually end up back in the United States.
Yeah. They're just going to the DMZ to avoid interdiction.
So we chased them past the DMZ. We handed them off to the Cubans. Next thing you know, the Cubans said, come and get the load, come and get the defendants, mm-hmm. and the boats are yours.
Right.
And we want to cooperate with you on this program. State Department went crazy. I got called from the director.
They're mad, huh?
They were mad.
Yeah, they get really mad.
And I got calls, and the ambassador from Nassau called me, and his name was Chick Heck. And Chick, we were good friends, multimillionaire. And he said, Pete, what have you done? I said, Chick, it's time that somebody takes it. And I said, now the Cubans are saying they want to work with us.
Right.
That has never happened. So we're the only ones that established relations with the Cuban.
And so, that's, of course, that's what happened to you. Now you established a communication with Cuba who have never had any communication with, even if you can't cross the DMZ
for years.
And you can't interdict, at least now you can call, you can talk to each other, you can start to cooperate.
Mm-hmm. And we don't have to go through the Coast Guard.
Right.
Right. Everything you've done in your career, now you're continuing to teach, right? You continue to do your public speaking. Yeah. You continue to do training. And here you are to this day still teaching guys the trade craft that we have as undercovers and operatives and assets, right?
Right.
Well, I could say, and I'll say on behalf of Dutch too, he'll say it, but it's our honor to sit here with you. Well, and to sit here and meet you in person. You blazed the trail for us, right? We did the work.
We all did it together.
But long before we did it, and there were rules and trainings, and you blazed that trail in a way that, and you were cowboys. You were old cowboys and Westerners that, when this was all coming to fruition and being developed, you really blazed the way for us. And just like you described with Cuba and the U.S. and the things that you've done, hopefully it inspires somebody in a younger generation now that comes after us and sees the work that you've done, sees the work that we've all done before, and it'll get done.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
you're
guys.
A true inspiration. Thank you so much.
It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
For behind-the-scenes photos, merchandise, and exclusive content, visit InsideTheLife.org. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get podcasts.